a rather bizarre new allegation from President Trump's former private physician. NBC News is reporting that Dr. Harold Bornstein says shortly after President Trump took office, only a couple weeks or so, the president's personal bodyguard and a top lawyer for the Trump organization suddenly came into his office, made off with all of the president's medical records going back decades. Here's more from Dr. Bornstein.
What exactly were they looking for?
All his medical records, his pictures, anything they could find. We must have been here for 25 or 30 minutes. We created a lot of chaos. I couldn't believe anybody was making a big deal about a drug that's to grow his hair, which seemed to be so important. And it certainly is not a breach of medical trust to tell somebody they take Propecia to grow their hair. What's the matter with that?
All right, let's assess the breaking news. Let's bring in former Assistant U.S. Attorney Kim Whaley, CNN legal analyst Michael Zeldin. He was Robert Mueller's former special assistant over the Department of Justice, and CNN political analyst Julie Hirschfeld Davis. So, Julie, let me start with you. This is pretty extraordinary to hear the president's longtime personal physician, Dr. Harold Bornstein, he'd been the physician for 30 years, if not longer, all of a sudden say that a couple of weeks or so after the election, they burst into his office and they start going through his files and take everything, all the medical records regarding Donald Trump, who was then the president of the United States. And he says he doesn't think they had some sort of medical order that would allow that kind of intrusion.
Right. I mean, it's very intriguing. First of all, this doctor is a sort of an odd figure. He's appeared in various points since the president was elected, saying different things about his state of health. But you do have to wonder whether this was a medical issue or a legal issue. And, there are pretty robust privacy laws surrounding all these health records. So on what authority were they doing that? What were they actually looking for? I think we have a lot more questions than we do answers at this point.
And it followed a day after the doctor, Dr. Bornstein, had suggested that, yes, the president was taking a drug to increase his hair growth.
That's right. And it would seem to me that the procedure here is to say, I'm changing doctors. I'd like copies of all of my medical files so I can port them over to my new doctor. He may have, under HIPAA or other things, an obligation to retain those files himself. So in a sense, it's sort of a burglary. They just sort of took out this stuff without any sort of legal process that authorized them to do that. And it's a little bit frightening, honestly. A
sort of a burglary, those are strong words. When you're, explain, you're a former prosecutor.
Well, I just don't know under what authority a patient has the right to enter a medical office and retrieve folders, even though they're their folders of his own medical treatment, that they have the right to just take them without a civil procedure in a court that authorizes that in some way. I don't know for certain, but it strikes me that it is a theft of some sort.
What do you think, Kim? You're a former assistant U.S. attorney.
Well, it's really difficult to tell based on this limited information, but I think the broader picture here is whether we have another instance potentially of the notion that certain people in government are above the law, can do the things they want to do for their personal reasons. And, the story will come out, but that's part of a bigger picture if that is the case. Where we've seen that this particular administration not really adhering to the norms and rules that everybody else adheres to. So we'll see how this comes out.
Dr. Bornstein says he's speaking out after the whole incident over the past few weeks with Dr. Ronnie Jackson, who was the White House physician nominated by the president to become Secretary of Veterans Affairs. He's speaking out now that he said he, Dr. Bornstein, felt raped, frightened, and sad when Keith Schiller, the president's longtime bodyguard, who was then working in the White House, and another large man, his words, large man, came into his office on February 3rd. This was 2 weeks after the January 20th inauguration, and said they were taking everything. Bornstein said they must have been here for 25 or 30 minutes. It created a lot of chaos. He said he was not given a form authorizing the release of records signed by the president. That's known as the HIPAA release.
Well, and I mean, we do, Ronnie Jackson came to public prominence. I mean, those of us who work in the White House knew of him as the White House doctor for many years, but he came to public prominence when he went out to the lectern and made all those statements about the president's health and, sort of said that he gave him an extraordinary bill of health, health and said that he had been, examining him, and they were making the disclosures that, presidents for many, many years have made about their own physical and well-being. But the question was coming in would this doctor of of President Trump's, who had been treating him for quite some time before he was elected and before he was in public life, know something about his health that for some reason people around the president wouldn't want to come out. And so I think that's one of the questions here. We have to figure out, what were they looking for? Was this just a routine, as you said, we're going to get the records and give them over to his current physician, or was this more of an effort to make sure that the public could find out something that the president didn't want to get out?
Yeah.
And I'm not saying, Wolf, that anyone committed a crime of burglary or theft. I'm just saying it has the sort of appearance of an unlawful taking, but I'm not accusing anyone of a crime.
Yeah, and in this report, Bornstein said that the Trump team cut all ties with him, even though he'd been a physician for 35 years or so, after Bornstein had told the New York Times that Trump, as we said, was taking Propecia. That's a drug for enlarged prostates that is often prescribed to stimulate hair growth in men as well. The story quotes Trump as saying that quotes Bornstein as saying after he told the New York Times about that, they completely cut ties with him. You think you're going to be the White House physician? Well, guess what? They said to him, you're not going to be the White House physician. Does this fit into a broader legal picture, Kim, that you see right now, what happened with this longtime personal physician of the president?
Well, I think it fits into a broader legal picture to the extent to which we're seeing this president make attempts prior to the election to shield the American public from information. Now, we've also heard about security clearances at the top levels of the White House, some problems with that. The security clearance process does not apply to elected officials. It does not apply to the president. It does not apply to members of Congress. The idea is the American public gets to vet their candidates through the electoral process. So from a broader democratic standpoint, the fact that this kind of information is being withheld is problematic and perhaps is something that Congress should think about in future years, actually requiring some of these disclosures of presidential candidates if it's not getting out to the American public. Because we, as voters, have a right to know where the problems are before we put somebody in office, the highest office in the land.
And what's ironic is that Dr. Bornstein, in that interview in the New York Times, in which he talks about Propecia, that drug, he also said that the president was the healthiest guy, would be the healthiest president ever in the history of the country.